Now, our next story is almost impossible to believe.
Yeah. OK, so here are the facts. This is Amanda Riley. Let's have a look at Amanda. Amanda is a mum. She's a wife. She's a churchgoer. She's a blogger. But sadly, she's suffering from stage 4 cancer. Or, at least, that is what she told everyone.
For almost a decade, Amanda took thousands in donations, but her cancer diagnosis was all a lie.
Yeah, so huge financial and emotional scam was eventually uncovered by investigative journalist Nancy Muscatello, who ultimately helped police put Amanda behind bars.
The story has now been heard around the world in Charlie Webster's chart-topping podcast, Scamanda. Charlie is with us in the studio now alongside Nancy, who joins us live from New Zealand. She's on holiday. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for interrupting the holes as well at 2 a.m. or whatever it is over there. Come on, Nancy.
Thank you. I mean, I listened to this podcast. I listened to the first episode. Couldn't stop listening. It's absolutely fascinating. So people who haven't heard it, and if you haven't listened to this podcast, honestly, go to it. It's unbelievable. Charlie, just quickly tell us a little bit about who Amanda Riley is, because the person we saw seemed so wholesome, so lovely, so genuine. And she was kind of, if you go back in time, she was kind of like the influencer of her day, wasn't she, blogging? I can remember that when they took off.
Yeah, and you got the words exactly right, because she actually is charming. I've met her, which we'll talk about. She's very kind, she's very polite. And you talked about blogs. So in 2012, with this woman, Amanda, started a blog. It was before the days of... I mean, TikTok didn't even exist, right? And I don't even think we even used Instagram. It was like Twitter and blogging. So she got diagnosed with cancer, and she's a really wholesome local community woman. So she started a blog, and the blog just went all over. She became like a bit of a local celebrity, and her blog was so raw, it was so honest, and it really helped people. And this just kind of went on, and then she became part of a church, and she was giving talks and testimonies on stage on a mega church. So we're talking in front of thousands, and showing how...
Is this before she said she had cancer?
No, she started a blog which was called...
It's about cancer.
Yeah,
so the whole blog is about cancer.
Can suck it.
Gotcha.
So it was about her cancer journey. And, you know, she didn't just write about it. She posted photos of herself in hospital and going through the ordeal of that so many of us can relate to, whether it's affected by ourselves with cancer or from a loved one that we know. And she was honest with that. And we know that when you hear other people's stories, it helps you, right? When you hear their pain, you're like, I'm not alone in this.
And why would you question that? Because you see the pictures and you see someone's testimony, of course you want to believe them, don't
and
you?
obviously when you hear these heart-wrenching stories and then somebody asks for money, of course you think, oh, I want to donate, I want to help. If they're saying, oh, can you help me with some of this chemo or some of this medicine that I need, of course you're going to help, aren't you? Yeah,
so as part of her blog, she set up, you know, a donation page, and she was just said, you know, can you help with meals? And so people, you know, small things like that. So, you know, when I've got to go and fly to New York for a clinical trial, and like I said, it wasn't just... It's not like she sat behind a keyboard. She was in hospitals. She shaved her head. You could see what she was going through, and she showcased that through documents of pictures before Instagram. Everybody did it on Instagram. It was like an Instagram blog. And she started to ask for money, and people gave money, but they also gave, you know, cash, not just through her website, in-kind services, looked after her children, because in the end she had a miracle child and another miracle child. We'll get onto that. And people helped her.
Yeah.
Because they want... You know, we should give. It's really important that we help people that are struggling.
Unbelievable.
So let's bring Nancy in. Nancy, you're a journalist. When did this come to your attention? And was your first contact with this someone saying something doesn't add up here?
Yeah. The first time I was contacted was in just before the summer of 2015. So I got a anonymous email from someone out in the community that knew her situation, and they reached out and asked me to take a look at it and to see if there was something I could pursue in it. They had information that was, you know, very helpful to kind of as a jumping off. That made sense to me to say, okay, let me have a look at what's going on here.
So after investigating and doing quite an extensive amount of investigation, you then decided, you know what, I've got enough evidence here, and you went to the police, didn't you?
Yeah, it's because, that wouldn't normally be something I would do if I would be able to move the story forward and be able to tell it on the television show I was working at the time. But with this, it was so brazen and so out of control by the time I was able to investigate and look into all the details that I knew she needed to be stopped. And to me, that was important. She was victimizing so many and getting bolder and bolder in what she was doing.
So, I mean, she even sued Nancy. She even went toe to toe with Nancy.
Well, that was my next question. Because when she's confronted with this, she doesn't admit, she doubles down, right?
Yeah, she turned the heat on.
She's not scared of the fact that the police are involved. She doubles it up, doesn't she, and turns on you and everybody who's coming for her, doesn't she?
Yeah, oh no, absolutely. It didn't slow her down at all. In fact, it amped up everything she was asking for. And it wasn't just myself, she had been talked to by Detective Martinez, and then federal agents raided her home. She knew of me. She knew I was there when they raided the home. And that next night, right after that, federal agents leave her home, and she's posting about, having another trial and needing more money to move forward with that. Yeah, it didn't stop her at all.
So people were still believing that, this wasn't true?
Yeah, and even when I started to work with myself and Nancy got together, and then I started to build and make the story, and I flew to San Jose and I started to speak to people in the community. People wouldn't speak to me because of Nancy, because they still thought Nancy, right, that she was the enemy. Yeah. And even Amanda was saying on her blog that this enemy. And so people thought Nancy, and there's an ex-wife, which is, you'll listen to the podcast that they thought they were in cahoots, and that they were coming after this poor woman who's a mother, she's a wife. You did the introduction.
Yeah.
She's an inspiration in the community. She was helping other people as well. It wasn't just herself. She was, making gift bags for people that also had cancer. She joined young people's cancer groups, to work through their trauma.
So, Nancy, I'll come to you again. How did she end up getting caught?
So, federal agents at the point, here in the States, what they'll do is they held a grand jury. The various people I had been in touch with over those years had to testify. They were also able to subpoena all her medical records for many, many years. And from that, they were able to put together their case for assistant U.S. attorneys here in the United States, and were able to, it was actually the first federally indicted person for a cancer scam ever by the IRS or by a federal agency.
It's an unbelievable story. It really is an unbelievable story.
Yeah.
And the fact that the judge actually gave her 5 years instead of 12 months, because ultimately they were so disgusted with what she had done.
Yeah.
You was actually there at the courts when she was committed. I mean, I can't believe it. Charlie, you're still speaking to her in prison, aren't you?
Yeah. So, oh my God, how long have we got to explain that?
No, did she do it for the money? Did she what? Did she do it for the accolation?
I think she did it for validation and attention. And I've gone a bit back into her history, and I think this is something that started to happen over time. We found out a lot of things that she was doing, say, at university age, where she would lie about things to be able to get away with not working and things like that. So I think Nancy thinks it's money, so we have a different opinion. Yeah. I think it's about attention, and we even can relate to it very quickly in terms of, like, social media. We look at how many likes, affirmation, validation, and she just started to build that over time. This went on for so long, but the key thing about this was she did tell the truth, technically, because she did go to clinical trials. She was in hospital with pictures of a shaved head.
Yeah.
She fainted in church, and, she wet herself and had symptoms, and she was picked up by an ambulance, and people saw that. So why would you question her? She was extremely clever, vindictive and manipulative, but she is speaking to me in prison, and she feels like she's the victim of all this.
Who's she blaming?
Nancy.
So is she saying she's still got cancer?
The one that Nancy's on holiday, I mean, she must need it.
I know. She's saying she's got health problems, and she is saying it was this scheme to get her and to ruin her life by Nancy, so she's not necessarily taking accountability for
Charlie,
it.
what do you think, and Nancy, I'll ask you as well, what do you think her end game in all of this is or was?
Oh, God, that's such a good question. I still feel like she believes some of this. So the reason why, Alison, you mentioned the judge came down so hard on her wasn't because it was the first case of its kind, was because the judge said she thought she was a risk to society because she feels like she's going to do it again.
Yeah.
So I feel what people believe sometimes their own lies, and then it becomes very hard because they just repeat those pattern of behaviours. But I think it is attention.
Yeah.
So
I
really,
think
she
it's all
needs
about
help.
Yeah.
Do you think anybody else is doing anything like this, Nancy?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean,
There is.
I know we disagree with it, is it attention or not? I mean, at some point, when you're constantly asking that you need that money or you can't get the treatment, and it was always an ask for money for it, even with the attention, I don't like to give her any type of excuse
Yeah,
for what she did, because there were hundreds of people affected, and quite frankly, drew so many resources away, those that are truly sick. So, you know, I get that there is definitely attention needs, but to the point where, you know, you're in and out of remission 4, 5, 6 times asking for more and more money, to me is just absurd.
And people are doing this, and so I've found a lot of people that are doing this. So I think I don't want to scaremonger in any way, because I just wanted to get the message that I think it's still really important that we, you know, I've had messages saying, well, I do really need help and I'm scared to ask for help because people might not believe me. So please know that we should be empathetic and we should be kind to people, but just be aware of manipulative behaviours, because it's not this big scary monster. It's subtle behaviours that happen over time that manipulate people.
Well, listen, Alison's listened to it. She said it's fantastic. By all accounts. I mean, I imagine we've just barely scratched the surface there, but thank you so much, Nancy. You may now go back to sleep.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Charlie.
The
Thanks,
podcast,
Scamanda.
Scamanda, available to stream on all podcast platforms. Thanks.
Thank you.